What's going on? This is E40, the one and only 40 Water, with the soundtrack for the town, shouting out BAMFest 2021 International. Produced by the Lower Bottoms Players, BAMFest 2021 International from Oakland to the world, live from the Black Arts Movement District in West Oakland. Sponsored by Earl Stevens Fine Wines, man. You know what I'm talking about? Support the culture.
I hope this reaches you with good health and spirits. Moving in and out your life. See, we coming with that light force. Pump it down in the town. Praying that it takes its course. Reminiscing on the beautiful places, the different faces, exotic stages. This music takes its high for real. I know that fear for real, but still. They say love is the answer, they say love is the way. Listen the world, I hope I see you again someday. In isolation, trying to find the right words to say. I love you. To the rest of the world, from Oakland to
BandFest 2021 International is 31 days of art, culture, education, civic discourse, and networking events offered as a community celebration of our legacy of resilience, our massive reservoir of talent, and our legendary determination for equity and justice for Black people. BandFest 2021 is a hybrid event offering both virtual and live programming. The festival is presented by the Black Arts Movement Business District, Community Development Corporation, and produced by Oakland's premier North American African Theater Company, Lower Bottom Players. Under the artistic direction of Ayodele Nzinga, MFA, PhD, the Poet Laureate of Oakland. For most information on festival programming, please head to bandfest.com.
What's up, family? I am Kat Brooks, coming to you this morning with Kat's commentary for BAMFest 2021. We are wrapping up BAMFest this week. Upon conclusion, we will have brought you 31 days straight of Black art, culture, stories, politics. Every Monday of the past month, I have been joined by a change maker, an artist, an advocate, folks that are impacting the social and cultural fabric of our communities. This morning, I'm joined by my friend, someone I admire deeply, a change maker, a movement leader, a spiritual guide, so many things. Baba Greg Hodge. Greg Hodge is a social change activist and organizational development consultant, working as a strategist, meeting designer, racial equity trainer, facilitator, and coach. See y'all, I told you so many things. Greg works with a range of groups from small nonprofits and foundations to public agencies, particularly school districts and foundations. Greg currently serves as the executive director for the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. He also works as the chief network officer for the Oakland-based Brotherhood of Elders Network and is a coordinating partner in designing the Healing Generations Institute with the National Compadres Network. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning, Kat. Always good to see you. Thanks for having me on this morning. Oakland is amazing, and it's amazing because of you and the other folks who are doing this work out here. So thank you and congratulations for all the great work over the years.
Thank you, and same back to you, right? I feel like I absolutely have the honor and privilege of standing on your shoulders. There's so much work that you've put down for the town, and not just the town, the country, right? The world. I mean, your work is global. For folks who don't know you, tell us about yourself. How'd you come up, and a little bit about your political history, your work you've done here in the town.
Sure, thank you. Well, whenever I introduce myself, I mean, the bio that you read is there's some facts in there, but what I think about is that I'm a product of my community. I grew up in a small town in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, with two parents who were the first college educated folks in our family. They were both public school teachers. My father was a musician and an artist in the schools and in the churches. My mother was a reading teacher who became a principal. And so my values and what I aspire to for my children and for the children of this community, as well as the elders and everybody in between, is that sense of connectedness, that sense of glue, that sense of healthiness that I had. I grew up in the segregated South, segregated theaters, segregated parks, segregated pools, but never did I feel less than. Never did I feel that I was without a community that supported me. I watched my parents respond to community crisis. So when somebody had a fire in their house, my mom was loading up food and clothes, and we were going over there. And it wasn't that my mother would ever get out the car. She would say, "Greg, take this up to Ms. Williams' house. Take this over to Ms. So and so. Take this over to Mr. Whoever." We also kind of grew up in a community where everybody was respected to their fullest extent. So even the man who was kind of like the neighborhood wino, like we had to call him Mr. something. You couldn't talk at him, you couldn't curse in front of him. They like that kind of ethic about respectful relationship in the churches I grew up in the Boy Scout troop I was in, my mom had me and my sisters in all kinds of stuff. My mom was a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, so we was having to go to the recitals and the botillions. Very middle class kind of thing. But I grew up around what we call in the South folks that were dirt poor. Like literally, I have friends, when you go to their house, you see the floorboards and you can see the ground through there. They didn't have insulation, didn't have heating. And so my grandmother and her generation grew up like that. And so it's not lost on me that the privilege, the blessings that I've received as an adult here in Oakland over the years have been so much based. When you talked about standing on shoulders, I'm sure my mom and daddy and my grandmom and them, their shoulders is sore because I was fidgeting around on their shoulders, trying to launch myself into something meaningful. Because honestly, with the thing that gives me a lot of joy is actually serving other people. And it may sound a little cliche-ish, but I get my thrill, that little tingle you get in your spine sometimes when you know you're doing the right thing. That's what happens for me whenever something happens good here in Oakland. So I came to Oakland after going to college in the Chicago area at Northwestern University, came here, went to law school, and then practiced in a community-based practice. I had this big grandiose idea that I was going to be doing international business law in Africa, and I ended up doing landlord tenant work, personal injury, people having car accidents, like the everyday legal problems that people have. And as a result of my engagement in the arts community as a West African drummer, I became, for a minute, I was sort of like the go-to lawyer for the arts community, the Black arts community. And so there's just been a range of experiences that I've had here in Oakland as a parent. Before we came on air, we were talking about our kids, and I have 5 children who I love dearly, and they span in age from 37 to 12. So I'm having all kind of parenting experience that's different. Like Shanaka, my oldest, who is an artist, a working artist, who I'm very proud of. She came out of this community as a spoken word artist. She's now writing TV shows, writing a storyline about a Black girl who who basically reverse engineers Iron Man's suit. But the idea that my children, Shanaka included, grew up in this community, benefited greatly from the range of experiences, some great and some not so great, that have made them artists, that have made them social change workers, that have made them, my son who's a real estate agent, he's trying to sell real estate in a way that keeps Black folks in their homes. So I feel very proud of this community that I've kind of grown up in this community. I was a member of Wose community as a spiritual leader for 37 years. I've been part of national efforts like the Black Community Crusade for Children. I'm one of the founding directors of Oakland Freedom Schools, which is still going after 20 some odd years. So I just feel like I've had the blessing to have my hands in a lot of different places to help, to lift, to lead, to listen. And I think that has put me in a really interesting place in my life where I feel like I want to continue my service.
Say that age range of your children again. What's what? Okay,
37, 37, 31, 29, 27, and 12.
Wow. So
yes.
when I first moved to Oakland, which was in 2008, my baby was 3. And I was a single parent. And one of the things that drew me, right, to taking the job and saying yes to Oakland was what it felt like to be outside, right? The culture, the melting pot of people, the political statements people were making on the corners. it felt like, right? Yes, this is a place I want to raise my Black child, right? Where her Blackness was going to be affirmed, if not in the classroom, we can maybe talk about that later, but on the street corners and the after school programs, right? There were places in the political organizations that existed here. The Oakland that I moved into in 2008 is not the Oakland that we live in today. What has it been like raising your children with that shifting demographic, with the shifting dynamics, the shifting politics? What's different?
Yeah, it's a great observation. And I think that, so where is it? Everything must change, right? I mean, we've written songs about that. We've sing about that. Now, the way change happens, where we end up with that change matters, right? And so, as you say, the Oakland I moved to in 1982 is very different from the Oakland that we're inhabiting in 2021. The Oakland I came to was very rich in neighborhood culture. We were not about a decade after the sort of height of the activism of the Black Panther Party and the Gray Panthers and Brown Berets. Even civic organizations like ACUR and NAACP, East Bay Democratic Club. I mean, those were the places where leadership was developed. Those are the places where a sense of why art was important. When you look at Emory Douglas's work, when you look at Tarika Lewis, when you look at like any of those artists, Ayodele Nzinga, any of those artists who have kind of been around for a while, and they've been sort of storytelling and visual arts making and all of that. People like Tracy Bardlow. When I think about that, those folks in the arts community had a lot more access to things. When gentrification really took hold, and what I say to people, who are newcomers, it's not that we don't like you. It's that we don't like you acting like nothing was here before you got here. That's right. The problem. Right. So even as recently as this morning, like I would walk my daughter to school this morning, and as I walk home, I see these two, young looking white folks coming up the street walking their dog. And even with my mask on, I said, good morning, very clearly, right? And I didn't hear anything other than a kind of humph. And I wanted to say, well, the normal response is good morning to you. So I feel like there's like this process of reculturing people to our neighborhoods that if they think that what was here before they got here wasn't of value, why'd they come? If they think that we're not resilient and that we're not going to put up a fight to maintain the cultural underpinnings that we have. And when I say culture, I'm not just talking about the manifestations of culture, good music or visual arts. I'm talking about the ethos, the attitudes, the principles, the behaviors that make a place a place. And so I think that when I think about the loss of Black businesses, going all the way back to Esther's Order Room, Esther's was around for 50 years. And it wasn't until this recent round of gentrification that they had to become something else. It wasn't the BART tracks being built over their head. It wasn't a post office being built. It wasn't a Cypress freeway structure, both the original one and the new one. That kind of loss of cultural assets is important. And I think that every city, DC and Southeast side DC, Harlem, South side Chicago, all these places where I've had benefit of traveling have seen the same sort of thing. And so I think last thing about it, Kat, to me, it's not just about resurrecting what was. It is in fact building a cultural base on top of what was already there. It's sort of like a model that comes out of ancient Egypt. When they would build pyramids, often they would take an old pyramid, maybe sometimes one that didn't work out so well, and they would build on top of it. You've seen mosques and temples built on top of that, the Notre Dame in Paris. So it's a great metaphor for understanding that those earlier cultural actors, artists, writers, social change agents who knew how to use art in service of transformation, that we have to build on top of that build with and for, not instead of. And I think that's to me, that's part of the change we've seen. And most of us, like you and other folks who are artists and activists, are not willing to let it go.
At all. And I think one of the things, so I'm writing for the Chronicle now, and they don't read the comments, right? You're not supposed to read the comments, but I do, and I've been reading the comments there and also on social media platforms, and more importantly, tracking where they say they live, right? And one of the other changes that I've noticed is that the most vile, hateful, racist stuff used to come from people that were like on the other side of the country, right? Or far in the suburbs, which we know now, you know, is where Black and brown people are being pushed. But these folks, Greg, live in Oakland, right? These folks, more and more increasingly, right? Folks who don't care about preserving our culture, who don't care about Black identity, Black culture, Black right to exist here in Oakland, has been shocking to me and disheartening. And I wonder about their impact, right, on our future political landscape. People with, I can't even say moderate, right-wing, conservative, racist viewpoints sort of flooding the town.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's almost like we live in very cyclical moments, right? Because if you know the history of Oakland from the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, this place was one of the hotbeds for Ku Klux Klan activity. There are photographs of the Ku Klux Klan in full regalia, hoods, the whole thing. And I ain't talking about no neighborhood hoodies. I'm talking about them Klan hoodies. Walking up the street in Richmond, California, where they got a permit because they had originally gotten a permit to march 5,000 Klan members, men, women, and children, up Broadway. And then eventually somebody revoked that permit. They had a induction ceremony at the Oakland Coliseum, 2,000 people there. So these are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those people, right? Who come with this attitude of privilege. They don't think, Becky didn't think she was doing anything racist at the lake. The Karens, and I don't know, do we have a name for the white dudes like the
I've been calling them Kens.
The Ken. Okay, that's a good one, like Barbie and Ken, right? The Kens, you know, they come into the same thing. So now here's the thing. I'm the kind of person that believes that I'm gonna give everybody a chance until you prove me wrong, right? So that I don't know exactly how you grew up, where you grew up, what influence you have, but when you say collectively that energy is moving toward a more right-wing, reactionary, you know, sort of thing, then I'm concerned, right? And I think you're right. Our politics are at a crossroads. We've seen the sort of the conservatism coming into the policing conversation. We've seen the conservatism coming into the conversation about our unhoused brothers and sisters. So I think that the body politic right now is pretty sick. It's pretty wobbly. And I think it's going to take all of us, myself included, to bring a different conversation forward, to bring a conversation that says we believe in hope, that our children have to be hopeful about what we do about climate change, that our children have to be hopeful about when they hear gunshots at night, they got to then listen for an ambulance. Now, this is the experience that my children have had for their whole development in Oakland. When they hear gunshots, they then listen for, am I going to hear police cars or an ambulance? Because if they do, they know that somebody got hurt or at worst killed, right? That shouldn't have to be. And I'm kind of the mind that if we can't change that sense of hopefulness about jobs, about housing, about even the young people who grow up here who want to own a home here, most of them are priced out. They can't afford to live here. So they're moving to other places, moving to Utah, Montana, Arkansas, you know, wherever. And so I think the hopefulness there. And then the second thing I'd say about this is a sense of healing. As human beings in this African body, as human beings in this Black body, we are resilient. We aren't. This is the thing that people have to understand about us. We ain't going nowhere. Like we've been here, we're going to be here. So you're gonna be forced to engage with us. You don't get to buy us out, so to speak. So I think that politics are a reflection of the overall culture, a reflection of the overall society. And I remain hopeful. I remain healthily working through the healing that we all need to work through. When I say healing, I'm talking about the 400 years of historic trauma, as well as the last 5-6 decades of contemporary trauma in these neighborhoods, in our schools, in all of the places where we occupy in those spaces. So I think that the folks who have come and don't have the goodwill, don't have the good sense of working with the people who have been here are short-sighted. You might get that apartment, you might get that house, but you're not going to enjoy the neighborhood because you're trying to take things out of the neighborhood that are the reasons that you actually came here.
That's right. That's right. So no surprise here. I want to shift to the conservatism of the politics that we see flooding the conversation on public safety and policing. specifically, I want to start with, we now have the ATF, the FBI, and the CHP that have been invited into our city in the name of safety. As a student of political movements, as a student of the engagement between law enforcement and Black communities, your responses to this, and if you could tag onto there, your reaction to the radical resistance to the idea that investing in prevention makes us unsafe as opposed to safer.
Yeah, it is fundamentally a shift in perspective, a shift in mindset, a shift in beliefs that is necessary. If you believe that people of color are naturally criminals, if you believe that people of color don't care about their children's welfare and safety, if you're a person who thinks that this is all about, people with guns who want to be able to move, like resources from one person's pocket to the next, then you're out of touch. You're out of step. You're not in a conversation that can ever be productive. It is unfortunate that CHP and ATF, these become alternatives because I think our leadership has not figured out a way to help everyday people understand that your safety is not based on the number of police officers that patrol your neighborhood. The average Black person, the average brown person, people like George Galvez, Nicole Lee, friends of mine, people that do this work, we know that we have to make us safe. And I think I give you big props for saying we spent all this money on policing and we're not safe. So clearly it's not spending money on policing, that it has to shift toward those other interventions. Macro, I totally support the macro idea that we can outsource or have people sourced as social workers and mental health workers and do that in a sustained way. That's a building block toward what we need to get to. I admit, I understand the challenge. It's a huge challenge to get the everyday person who lives on 18th and Market to understand that it's not about police services, and that if we share with people, 70% of the calls that are made to 911 are not for guns, knives, other dangerous situations. Therefore, somebody parking their car in my driveway, but you can't get towed until OPD shows up. It's for the noise complaints. It's for jaywalking. It's like all these minor things. I think that if we had a police department that was smaller in size, that was focused on the most heinous things that go on, and even with that, be focused on humanistic responses. Yes, sometimes you need to escalate a situation to control of it. But when I talk to police officers here and around the country, the best police officers, people like when Rich Word was the chief. Rich was 35 years old, chief of police back in the 2000s, late 90s. And his thing was, I don't want a police officer who wants to chase people across fences, who wants to play good cop, bad cop, good, cowboys and Indians, and as messed up as that metaphor is, right? And what he said to me was that he wants the police officer who knows how to talk people down. That he wants to get a police officer who gets people out of the situation. And that requires, in my opinion, police officers who are from this community, who grew up here, who are trained in this community to the extent that you need police. Because ideally, we want to get to a place where that's the last resort. That's the last thing that has to happen. And so I think the balancing act between full abolition and fully funding police departments the way they've been funded is there's some middle common ground that's got to be gained there. And I don't have all the solutions on this. I think the reason that I'm interested in public service and doing more is that to get us to a collective conversation about it. I think the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, for what it was okay, but we got to build on that. We got to build on the best thinking that we get from ourselves, best thinking from around the country, around how to make ourselves safe based on us changing our ideas about safety. What does it really mean to be safe and secure? Because most brothers and sisters I know do not feel safe and secure. They don't feel safe and secure when the police show up. They don't feel safe and secure with the desperate and somewhat misguided youngsters who are shooting all these weapons out here. There's got to be a place in between, and I believe that we can get to that.
I do too. I mean, a couple of observations that you can choose to react to or not. One is that the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force was a demand, right, from folks who have been doing this work for a long time, and it was sabotaged from jump. I mean, just from jump, there was active active sabotaging of that movement. We went from a commitment to chart a pathway, not an immediate, but a pathway, right, to reducing the police department's budget to a $38 million increase, and then a communications campaign that lied about what actually happened. And then the second piece for me, I think, is just the logic, right? So people are arguing we need more police for more public safety. Well, if you look at the communities that are living with crime, because I don't have a better word for it, versus the communities that aren't, I got tons of police in my neighborhood, right? Tons. It's the communities with the resources, right? Like where Libby lives, where they don't have the issues. So it's just even though it's like the arguments are being made in defiance of logic, data, facts, figures, and lived experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes out of fear. It comes out of like what will happen when the sideshow comes up the hill. Like what will happen when the gunfire comes up the hills. Like a lot of people in our hills communities don't have the lived experience that you're describing. Don't have the lived experience. I live in West Oakland, and I've lived here since 1992. I love my neighborhood. Does bad stuff happen here? Yes. Does great stuff happen here? Hell yes. I mean, so my thing is like if I see, and I've interacted with the police in a lot of different ways over the years. Sometimes it's been effective. I facilitated a project back in, man, it's like 20 something years ago now, called Code 33. And we would get 20 police officers together with about 20 middle school and high school students. And it was at a time where the school district and the city were talking about truancy. And they wanted police officers to pick kids up in the mornings at 8:30. If you weren't in school, they were supposed to pick you up and take you to a truancy center. Well, most people thought that was a uniformly bad idea. And so, because cops don't want to do, first of all, the cops didn't want to do that as a job. They didn't feel like that should be something that they should have to do. Second, concerns of people like me and parents and others was like, but once you get my son in the car because he's a little late for school, now you searching him for some little weed he might have, or something else that he's not supposed to be doing. But these are young people that in healthy communities, young people get to make mistakes. Young people get to get the benefit of the doubt. Not if you're black.
That's right.
Not if you're Latinx, not if you're Native. And so much of what I think has happened over the years around this set of issues, when we talked to those kids at that time, many of those young people said, I don't really trust the police because I don't know them. But now, after 6 weeks or so of conversation, said, at least I can look in the car, and if I see this officer that was in this program, I at least know them. The second thing that was interesting about it, which makes the case for if you're gonna have police, what is the culture of the police department? What are the motivations? One of the brothers who was a police officer at the time, we asked the question in the group, why did you want to become a police officer? He said, I grew up in Oakland, and I heard Huey P. Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, say we need to police our own communities. So he took that to mean I can do something to keep my neighborhood safe without the harassment, the assaults, the abuse, the racism that gets that substitutes for policing. So
that's not exactly what Minister Huey meant.
No,
you didn't mean go become the police, right?
It's not. But think about it. This person, he was a young person in Oakland, and that's how he heard it, right? And so when he comes to the job, he's coming to the job with, this is my community. And then he proceeds, and here's the other thing, he's sophisticated enough. He grew up in Oakland, didn't live in Oakland, but at the time, he lived in Vallejo. And he said one Saturday morning, he's in his yard, cutting his grass, obviously out of uniform. Vallejo PD rolls up on him and says, there's somebody the description was your description. And we said, well, what was it? Oh, 6'4" black man with a t-shirt, which that's everybody we know, right? And so he said, they put him on, he said, look, I'm an off-duty police officer. They started cocking guns as he was reaching for his wallet to show his badge. So he said to the young people in the room, I've experienced the same kind of harassment you have. So I get it. He's like, that's not our role. That shouldn't be our role, right? And you're right. Huey P didn't mean it that way. He meant like we're going to police ourselves, which is why they would show up. They would witness police actions with weapons. They were armed to do it, and which is why white establishment got so afraid of them. They knew the Constitution. They knew their rights. They knew how to operate in a way that was healthy for the community. So I think the bigger question that you're asking is, how do we redefine it? How do we redefine it? And that sabotage of that process, again, it takes leadership. It takes leadership at every level of this city, whether you're a leader in a CBO, leader of city council, in the mayor's office, to make a process like that make sense. Because that's sabotaging the special interests that got, inserted into that, it derailed much of the good work that could have happened. The bright side of it to me is that at least that conversation started. And I think that there's got to be a continuation of that redefining process, reimagining,
Trust.
but not starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Like
No.
starting from the places that we've already done.
Right. No. And I mean, and people have been having this conversation for a minute. This particular campaign, right, 6 years ago, 6 years of trying to push. And one of the things we said, right, we said 50, we meant 50, and we're going to keep fighting for 50. One slight pushback on something you said, or further engagement. And it actually was just recaptured beautifully in an essay in Marian Kaba's new book, We Do This Till We Free Us. There's an essay in there about hating summertime, because summertime is when more young Black youth are outside and more police are out there to harass the youth. And one of the things that the young person said is that this isn't about them knowing my name. They know my name. These cops have been on the beat as long as I've been playing outside. This is about them attaching my name, and I'm paraphrasing it, right, to an actual human being as opposed to a suspect, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's the relationships, right? And that's one of the things I learned in that process, that both to the extent that it, was useful, police officers said they want to get to know and understand the community better. That program that we did, many of those cops said, I need something like this to be part of my regular training, because we were dealing with stereotypes that kids have about cops and that cops have about kids.
But the kids' stereotypes are reinforced every time the cop slams their head into a wall.
Exactly. And we said that. We said that to the police officers in the room. And we said, you all have all the power. You got the badge, the gun, the authority of the state. It's your job to shape these relationships in a different way. And some of them, it was interesting, Kat, because some of them, the younger cops at the time, kind of got it. It was some of the older guys who didn't. And I have to say, there was also some of the people in that room should not be police officers, like under no circumstance. Because one of the cops, about week 3, got real frustrated with the kids complaining about, well, why you got the uniform and the badge and the gun and this and that and the swag you think you have and your shades and all that. And he said, look, we got a dangerous job, and if I got to shoot one of y'all to go home at night, I will. It's like, whoa. And it was interesting because it was at the end of the session. We didn't have time to really pull that comment apart. And I was co-facilitating, and I said, okay, all right, next week. We come back next week. First hand, it goes up, 16-year-old Latina, and she looked right at this cop and said, like, I remember what you said last week, and I need you to let you know that if we got to take one of y'all out to go home at night, we will too. So it was not a passive kind of conversation from the young people. They were saying, like, whatever we got to do to make it home, that's kind of what we're going to do. But but that particular officer who said that, in my opinion, you shouldn't be on the force if you think that's the response, right? Mm-hmm. To a group of young folks who are trying to understand your job, trying to have a little bit of empathy for you as a person. Because one of the cops, in the room was a 30-year veteran, and he said, part of what we need as police officers is we need mental health services too, because we're seeing all this trauma. Like, we're responding to all kinds of stuff. When you come in a house and somebody's been beaten with a blunt object, and you got to, kind of figure out how you get that person to the hospital, or, a woman is calling because she's been raped multiple times, or, all like the really hard stuff that police officers have to see makes them less human. So it is more than training. It is more than policy initiatives. It also has to do with some healing that's got to happen. We got to heal in our community from the trauma that's been foisted upon us. People who work in our community, who should be working for us, have to be healthy. They have to either be off the force or have the services they need to maintain a certain amount of humanity. But I don't have a lot of hope in that. I think the biggest hope is you recruit people who actually understand the city, who want to live here, who have connections here, and you reduce the force. You reduce it to a size that is really appropriate. And I think that continuing journey, that charting a pathway that you talked about, it's going to be really important over the next few years to get it right.
And resurrecting, well, two things. One is I can't remember the name of the conference, but you were there. I think you were facilitating. Shanaka was there. We were in New York. Oh, I don't know.
Was it one of the? I think it was the something at Carnegie Hall, and it was like probation departments around the country who were trying to figure out the intersection between arts and
yeah,
and probation.
It was something there, but I ended up walking back to my hotel with a brother and from Philly, and I can't remember his name either, but he was talking about that he was in the process of training cops about community trauma. And he was like, he wasn't very far into that process, listening to what they were saying. And he was like, oh, actually, we need to pause and we need to be dealing with your trauma. And he pivoted his work. And, and I thanked him because that's not my work, right? That's not my role, not where my focus is. But I could see in that conversation with him the absolutely necessary. And then the only other thing I want to say, and I do want to pivot because I want to talk about COVID and the brotherhood, is oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. Where did I want to go to? I guess we're pivoting because there it went.
Let me say one other thing about that though, because the piece you talked about in Philadelphia, that brother and having to move his work to be the person who is now working with police officers and their trauma. I did a project in Philadelphia with the Mural Arts Project. And Philadelphia is known for these amazing murals. And one of the projects that they put together was a mural on a police substation that cops and kids in that neighborhood helped put together. And the art is a vehicle to the relationships. It's and I agree with what you said earlier about the notion of how do you restore humanity to this? Like, how do you think about who we all are, not just knowing a kid's name, but seeing that kid the way I see my children. And this is what I challenge these cops to. If you're a parent, see this kid, this 15-year-old that you're stopping as your child, and how would you handle it? Would your behavior be as harsh? Would you put that kid on a hot roof of a hood of a car on a summer day if that was your child? Would you make your child lay on the sidewalk face down and humiliate them and then let them go? And now they pissed off at everybody and everything, and they take it out on somebody else. So that's part of the ecosystem that I think that we got to be concerned about. So
right, and I remember what I wanted to resurrect, and it was from earlier, right? When you were talking about in your family and your mother responding to community crisis, right? Taking the clothes, taking the supplies. We talk about interpersonal violence, right? Aunt so-and-so is going to stay for us for a while. This is how we have survived. We know how to do that, right? We are the experts, and it is a resurrection of, I think, what we've been engaged in since the first African was kidnapped and dropped up on these shores, right? We've always known that the state was not safety for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we bound ourselves to each other. Like one of the things I learned a few years ago in Brazil was there as part of a study group that included Hande Amara and Wade Nobles and Vera Nobles and some other folks from here. And we were looking at the Africanity of Brazil in the current political, economic, social context, and all of us were writing curriculum. And so one of the things that was fascinating that I learned about that was that in Brazil, when people were being transported initially from Angola, which is where the first round of Africans who came to the New World were coming from Angola, and then later from the Bight of Benin, from Nigeria, Dahomey, et cetera. And this was an interesting fact to me, that in Brazil, people who were on those ships together stayed connected to each other for life. In the way fraternities and sororities do. And I have to go back and find the name. There's a name for all of those people. It's almost like the way in immigrant communities here, if you came from Vietnam or Cambodia or Laos, you tended to live in communities with people that were from your original community, right? So there was something fascinating about that, these lifelong connections that were born of the trauma of the Middle Passage. Well, as a side note, playwright, director, that seems like a really interesting premise for a play.
Noting.
Just noting, right? but just the idea that even in our trauma, we stay connected to each other.
That's right.
We cry in our own language. We figure out what foods are similar. You know, like that kind of experience and the metaphor of that experience is kind of what we see in our communities now. We got a lot of community cohesion, but it comes out of staying connected often around the things that have happened to us.
Right.
So I think that resurrection, the renaissance of that kind of caring and hopefulness with each other, no matter what. I mean, I just have to imagine that my ancestors 3 generations ago in Arkansas and Mississippi, no matter how bad the situation was, no matter how harsh white supremacists behaved, that they still had this belief that we're gonna be all right. That we are, and if we're not gonna be all right, our children gonna be all right.
Right. So let's stay on this "we take care of us" thread, because I mean, you know, Lord knows, the world knows, right? I rail against the Shaft administration at every whip stitch. I cannot, however, remember being as angry at the administration as I was watching the abysmal failure. These are my words, I'm not putting them on you. The abysmal failure that our city's response to the COVID-19 pandemic was, and particularly the disparate um, the failure at addressing the disparate impact on Black folks and Black communities. Watched organizations like Community Ready Corps, right, provide PPE and information and masks and things because people couldn't get them. And you all, the Brotherhood of Elders, you coalesced to also provide support. Can you talk about both what you did, what you're doing, but also now, Baba Greg, right, with the Delta variant and understand that we're going to need boosters and that this thing is mutating, like your concerns and your concerns specifically for Black folks?
Yeah, no, it's a really important crisis, and it's an important crisis of our time. And I think the question of all of our leadership, whether you're in an elected position or a volunteer in some place, is going to be a defining one. This period is going to define us in a certain way. And I think that when we started back in April, Brotherhood Elders Network, which is an intergenerational network of Black men that's been around for a little bit more than a decade, we saw the need to begin bringing the Black community together in our own way around what's our response going to be. And we invited everybody. We invited everybody we knew to come be at those tables with us to help figure this out with our public health folks. And by that, I mean our community clinicians like Dr. Noho Ablada, Dr. Kim Rhodes, Dr. Damon Francis, you know, and others who also we pull together Oakland Frontline Healers. What emerged out of that was groups like the Umoja Health Project with Dr. Kim Rhodes at the UCSF. And what we realized very early on was, number one, the county nor the city could give us accurate data that was disaggregated by race so that we could know what's the impact in the earliest days of the pandemic on the Black community, on the Latinx community, on the Native community, on the homeless, unhoused community. Not homeless. I don't even like saying homeless. They got homes. They just not
outside.
don't have houses, right? And so, you know, we knew back then, and I think this is still a valid data point, that 2.5% of, I think the rate is something like Black County residents' rates for infection are at least 2.5 times higher than everybody else. Still, now this is still like after 18 months or so, that 72% of the COVID deaths are for Black people. Latinx folks get sicker than us. We die more than everybody else, in part because of the pre-existing health disparities, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, a whole bunch of other things that are themselves a result of racial inequities. And so you add to that a 36% increase in gun violence. This is a very difficult, and that's saying it mildly, difficult time to be in. And so our response was to say, we know what works in our community, so we can do pop-up testing sites. We can make sure, like groups like Community Ready Corps can get masks out. One of the very first activities was on 4th of July weekend of 2020 at Lake Merritt, and I think we distributed, in partnership with county, with private funders, we distributed something like 15,000 masks. And we were doing this in a way at the beginnings of the sort of credible messenger work to help people make informed choices about, do I get a test? Do I get a vaccine? Do I get a booster? So where we are now and what came out of that process was a natural outgrowth looking at from the New Black Deal that APTP and other groups put together, going all the way back to Contract for Black America, and every plan, initiative, proposal that we could find that dealt with Black life, housing, economics, education, where we could find that information, and we sort of distill that down to something we call the Garvey Plan. The Garvey Plan then became focused on power, wealth, and health. We then put together a $100 million proposal to the County Board of Supervisors. And I'm gonna come back to the city in a second. The County Board of Supervisors to make investments in the Black community along several lines. $6 million in rental supports, $12 million for down payment supports, $6 million for homeowner retention. A range of things around health, hubs, universal basic income, TA for Black businesses, grants for Black businesses, land trusts, many of the things that we talked about through the years. Almost 100 million additional dollars for mental health services and community hubs and life coaching. All of that emerged from a collective set of plans. We didn't just kind of come up with it. We said, these are the things. Back 2 weeks ago, on I think it was the 11th of August, we went to the County Board of Supervisors and were sorely disappointed with the process. They said we need to have a listening session. We were like, we've been listening for a long time. We need some acting sessions. We need some decision making. Why is it that and by the way, this was August when the County Board of Supervisors finally met to talk about any of this. That letter went to them on June 7th. So we went all summer without any response. $374 million of American Rescue Plan Act money that will be coming to the county. And we said, make sure you break off $234 million, $100 million for the Black community. But then we joined with Resilient Fruitvale, that's a group that's a 25 or so organization that's serving in the Fruitvale, Healthy Havens Court, My Eden Voice in Hayward, South County, right? With Oakland AAPI Unite, an emerging group of our Asian American Pacific Islander folks. Collectively, we said, if you funded the framework and some of the programs that we're talking about, you'd still have about $100 million left. The county's response, we need to fill in our budget holes and rehire county workers. We need to do all of these things to basically try to tell us a no before they even heard from folks. 12-hour meeting, 12 hours. Right? That was mostly presentations that were coming. You had the Superior Court making a presentation about what they needed. I mean, it was just kind of ridiculous. So we joined with those other organizations, those other coalitions, and said, we need to keep putting pressure on the county. September 21st is the date that they say they're going to make a decision about how those resources get spent. So that's one thing. So interestingly, during that hearing, Nate Miley, who's a Board of Supervisor member, and others kept saying, well, have y'all gone to the city? Have y'all gone to the school district, to ask them for resources? And basically we said, yeah, we went to the city. We were trying to, for instance, you remember this, we wanted to see at least $40 million of resources go to the Department of Violence Prevention. They funded it at 18 over the next 2 years, right? That's insufficient. There should have been more money to go to macro. There should have been a whole lot more resources around housing and other things. So we are actually in a demand moment with the county, and the county's trying to say to us, well, what did the city do? And we kept trying to bring it back to the county and saying, no, we're talking to our elected members of the Board of Supervisors about what you're going to do. Stop deflecting this to somebody else. So we're in the middle of that conversation right now. We encourage folks to get in touch with their members of the Board of Supervisors, ask them where they stand on this plan, African American Response Circle plan, as well as these others. All of these are now public records, so you can go to the county's website, I think, and see the content of these ideas. And these are well thought out ideas. It includes, and it included folks like Oakland Frontline Healers, Global Education and Communications that serves our African immigrant community. So we're in the thick of it. We're hoping that the city's response to COVID, it has to be, to me,
the city tells us to go to the county, right?
Exactly.
And not only that, but then the city eats its own. So groups like Community Ready Corps, instead of being celebrated and uplifted for filling the gaps that the city should do, eaten by the city, right? Condemned by the city. It's infuriating to me. And meanwhile, we continue to die.
No, it's unacceptable. It's unfortunate. And I don't know, it feels a little bit like every now and then when I was a kid, I would go to my mother and ask her something, and she'd say, well, go ask your dad. She wouldn't give me an answer. She would say, go ask your father. And my father would say, go ask your mother. That's kind of what this felt like without the love, right?
Right.
You go
Right.
check with somebody else. And it's like, but you have the resources in a moment of crisis. And what we were saying with the county, you need to relax all of these bureaucratic red tape that is designed to have more transparent public process. You can still do that transparency, but don't make this so difficult for community organizations to get the resources they need. And so
It wasn't that difficult for them to give the millions of dollars to Greg Ahern
no,
and the sheriffs. That wasn't a problem.
exactly. So that's kind of where we are with that, and then we keep pushing. We're not going to give up on it, and we hope that as more and more people become aware of it. And Kat, politically, part of it seems that the members of the Board of Supervisors feel very comfortable in their seats. They don't ever feel like anybody's going to challenge them electorally, so they can sit there and say, go talk to somebody else, when that should be their responsibility. We didn't hear any of our elected members during that meeting say, this is a good idea. This is something we can make happen for the Black community and the Latinx community, and tell us how we can work with you. We propose like even having a work group, outside those meetings to convene folks and work through these ideas. Haven't heard anything back on that.
All right, Greg Hodge, we have just a few minutes left. Maybe I should have started with this. I'm choosing to end with it. I wanted folks to be able to just listen to what you had to say without discounting it at all. You called me a couple weeks ago or texted me or something. We communicated with some big news. Why don't you share with our listeners, our viewers, what's the big news?
Sure. After a lot of soul searching and conversations with friends and family and my ancestors, because this thing it's gonna take all of them, right? I have decided to offer myself as a candidate for mayor of the city of Oakland. I think that our city deserves the kind of leadership that I want to bring to it. Someone who's got the skill set, the temperament, the experiences of working with all kinds of people in this city to make something happen. I think, as we talked about earlier in this conversation, the idea of hope matters. That, especially for our young people, how do we make sure we create an environment where even if things aren't the way we want them to be, that our young people feel but I can see myself in that in the future. I can see myself as an artist. I can see myself as an educator. I can see myself as a climate change worker. I think that notion of hope matters because we've come through a really hard period. We're still in it. 19 months into the pandemic, the 36% increase in gun violence, the level of just challenge and heartbreak that we see in our unhoused community, these all beg for a sense of hope. And not just hope, but hope tied to action, hope tied to healing, hope tied to resources, to make sure that we can feed and clothe and house and educate our children like every community in the world wants to do. A few years ago, there was an artist, and I can't remember who it was, a reggae artist says, everybody wants the same thing, don't they? We want, and that song talks about food and clothing and having fun and being in relationship with the people that you love. And so for me, I think that this moment that I want to offer myself for greater service has a lot to do with listening. So listening to what people have said, listening to the well-grounded arguments around public safety, around housing, around economic justice, and then lifting those ideas up, saying, here's some great ideas. We see that this can work. We've seen it work in other places, or it's innovative. Things like how the Department of Equity started, the notion that we need to have equity in everything. And that's the only problem I have with creating a department. When you create a department, it compartmentalizes it. It doesn't make it part of everything in the fabric of the city. But when the department said, and Desley Brooks gets credit for this, a former council person, when she said, let's bring equity to the cannabis dispensary licensing process, that made a lot of sense. Let's make sure that the young brothers and sisters who have been risking going to jail or selling a dime bag could actually be like these businesses that are making millions and billions of dollars in the community, in the cannabis industry, right? So that notion of lifting up the good ideas, debating those ideas robustly, but then getting to a place where we say, now that we've had that conversation, how do we implement? Because I will say, Oakland through the years I've been paying attention to city council, years I've been paying attention to other public bodies, we often will pass good legislation, but then it doesn't get implemented. We don't somehow implement. And I think that harnessing the sort of collective potential. When I first moved to Oakland in the 80s, this was the word that everybody always used about Oakland. Oakland has so much potential. Oakland's big enough to matter, but small enough to get things done. And I just feel like that we're at a moment, your leadership, mine, all of the people that we run with, as well as some of the people we don't run with. Like, how do we get to convince some of them this is what makes the city more livable? This is what makes the city thrive for everybody, right? And so I think that, and we can always, not me and you, but in general, people always had their disagreements about the how. But for the most part, when I listen to city council members as part of their retreat process over the last couple of months, almost all of them had the same set of priorities. Now, the priorities might have changed order from public safety to housing to bigger quality of life issues around blight, wildfire containment, a whole range of things. But the big question becomes, how do you implement? How do you have enough of a relationship between the mayor and the city council, the city administrator, the board of supervisors, the board of education, to actually see the city as a whole and to get things done? So as I launched this campaign, I'll have a more formal announcement in a couple of weeks. I'm very much interested in listening to what people, you and other folks have to say. I'm interested in listening to what our young people who go to school and walk these streets every day have to say. I'm interested in hearing about what our elders have to say. You know, when I moved into the house I live in, I had two African-American women who were on either side of me as elders. And Mother Allen on one side and Miss Tramble on the other side, they were my litmus test for whether I was doing the right thing. And I would ask Miss Tramble, you know, she would ask me, what are you up to? And I'd tell her I was up to, and she's like, well, why are you doing that? I mean, how's that working for you? And, you know, and having elders, like elders, she lived to be 100 years old. We were friends for 20 of those years, I guess. But having your finger on the pulse of Oakland, having your finger on the pulse of the town that you and I talked about in the early part of this interview, where the reason that we came, the reason that we stayed, the reason that we believe it's possible to thrive here is still in our hearts. And so that notion of, you know, like love being the thing that drives it, the theme song that you all played, I believe that. I believe that, as Che Guevara did, it said, you know, that love is the thing that drives activism if you really love your people. That love is the thing that drives good art making. That love is the thing that drives healthy environments. And so I just think that we're at a moment where I want to offer myself in that way. If the voters will have me, and I've been sort of pledged to work with all kinds of folks to make it happen, but that doesn't mean that everybody's going to have the same amount of voice in it. Like the activists who've been working, the people, organizations who've been working on these issues for decades, that voice is going to matter a lot to me. And so I just think that I would love to have your support, and I'd love to have the other folks that I know and love to see how we do this together. It's not about Greg having all ideas. What it is about is how do we collectively have the wisdom and the wherewithal to make Oakland even better than it is now, and be the city that we would be proud to have our grandchildren live in. Last thing I'll say about it, Kat, is I really want, at some point in my life, for my new grandchild, Aziza, who's 8 months old, to be old enough and aware enough to say, Baba. And she's gonna call me Babu, because I graduated from Baba to Babu. Babu. I would love for her to be able to say, thank you for making the city that you love better for me. That's what I'd like to see.
Well, Greg, I hope and I pray and believe you're going to have to look for and hold on to that love aspect, because what we're seeing and what I imagine is only going to escalate is the moderates and the right, by any means necessary, pulling Oakland back politically to the right. We've made a lot of progress moving to the left, 2018 to now. And I mean, I think that was the intention behind, you know, trying to lie about what didn't happen with the police. That's the intention of, you know, this conversation around public safety. It's the intention of a lot of decisions we're seeing around housing. I know, I mean, you were on school board forever. So, you know, stranger to what it means to run. I do think this is going to be a particularly brutal election cycle. Yeah, I would be interested in checking in with you as we move forward. But in the meantime, thanking you and sending you all of the love and the light and the juju, because it ain't easy and it ain't gonna be pretty. So
No, I agree. And I let me just say publicly, I want to thank you for all your good efforts, all the blood, sweat, and tears that have been expended on making things better, all the licks you have had to take, all the intrusions into your privacy, all of that. And it doesn't, Kat, it does not go unnoticed, and I appreciate it. And I know a lot of
thank
other
you,
people.
Barbara. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation. I know I've held you 30 minutes past what you agreed to, but this was, as usual, amazing. Greg, if folks want to get in touch or they want to follow your campaign, put it out there one time.
Yeah, at this point, I don't have a website yet, but if you send me a note just to gregoryhodge@gmail.com, I'll respond to you. So please send it out. I'm on Facebook, on my personal page, Instagram, all that. You can find me. But be looking out for in the next week or two. We'll have a more formal way to take things on behalf of the campaign. But again, Kat, I want to thank you for the opportunity to spend a little time talking to you this morning. And again, you know, hope and healing is what we need right now, and that's what I'm trying to be about.
Well, that's what I've known you to do in the time that I've been blessed to know you. So thank you. Thank you so much. For the rest, y'all, we got 2 days left of BAMFest. Go to bamfest.com to check out the rest of the events and, of course, to donate. Support Black art, support Black culture. Y'all be easy.
Thank you.
Wait. All right. There we go.
All right. Kat, thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you. I will definitely get you that link.
They say love is the
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
way.
Oh, and travel. You traveling today?
What's going on? This is E40, the one and only 40 Water, with the soundtrack for the town, shouting out BAMFest 2021 International. Produced by the Lower Bottoms Players, BAMFest 2021 International, from Oakland to the world, live from the Black Arts Movement District in West Oakland. Sponsored by Earl Stevens Fine Wines, man. You know what I'm talking about? Support the culture.
Your life, see we coming with that light force, bunk it down in the town, praying that it takes its course, reminiscing on the beautiful places, the different faces, exotic stages, this music takes its high for real, I know that fear for real, but still, they say love is the answer, they say love is the way, missing the world, I hope I see you again someday. Isolation, trying to find the right way.